Hi. The Path to the Light, the story of Michael Carson. Life is a journey that does not always go according to plan. But every step, even the most difficult, can lead us to something greater. Michael Carson was an ordinary man who lived a simple life. At the age of 25, he worked in a small workshop, repairing old furniture and had no great ambitions. He loved his job, although sometimes he felt like he was stuck in a rut. His town was small, quiet, and everyone seemed to be going with the flow. However, Michael dreamed of more. Since childhood, he loved to tinker and always wanted to create unique things. But fear of failure and lack of resources kept him stuck. His friends used to say, "Michael, these are just dreams. Be realistic." And he started to believe it. One day, while Michael was working in the workshop, his grandfather, whom he respected greatly, came with a strange question. "Michael, if you could do one thing that would change your life, what would it be?" his grandfather asked. Michael thought about it. He had always felt that his calling was more than just repairing furniture. But he had no clear plan, only a deep desire to create something unique that could inspire others. His grandfather just smiled and said, "Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start with what you have, and the rest will follow." This was the impetus for Michael to change. He began to think about how his love of crafting could become something more. His grandfather's words stuck deep in Michael's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about them. What if he could really do something meaningful by starting small? The next morning Michael returned to the workshop, but this time everything felt different. He looked at the old furniture waiting to be repaired and realized, "This is not what I want to do for the rest of my life." Michael decided to do something risky. That very day, he went to his grandfather's garage, took some old tools and a few pieces of wood that had been there for decades. He wanted to create something of his own, something unique. The first thing he decided to make was a small table with carved patterns inspired by nature. He worked nights until he finished his project. When the table was ready, he invited his grandfather to see it. His grandfather looked at every detail and said, "Michael, this is not just a table. It's a work of art. Now the only question is whether others will see it." These words became a new challenge. Michael realized that he needed to go beyond his studio and show his work to the world. Michael sat in his small workshop looking at the table he had created. His heart was beating faster. He felt proud, but with it came doubts. Will anyone like it? Will I be able to create something bigger? Several days passed before he dared to show his creation to others. Every time someone walked by his studio, Michael hesitated to invite the person to take a look. He was afraid to hear criticism, afraid that his work was just a hobby and not something more. One evening, his grandfather came to see him again. He saw Michael pacing nervously back and forth and said, "You are not afraid because your work is not good enough. You are afraid because it is important to you. And that's why you have to show it to the world." These words were like a breath of fresh air. The next morning, Michael took his table and took it to a local antique store. He approached the owner, an elderly man named Henry, and said, "This is my work. I'd like you to evaluate it." Henry looked at the table carefully, ran his hand over the smooth wood, and said, "It's done with heart. But if you want others to see it, you're going to have to put in more work." This phrase both encouraged and discouraged Michael. He returned home with a renewed desire to work, but with the realization that talent alone is not enough, you also need the courage to step outside your comfort zone. Michael decided it was time to work even harder. His grandfather and store owner Henry were right. It's not enough to create something good, you need to show it to the world. But how? The next day, instead of returning to his usual routine, Michael arranged a day of inspiration. He visited a local crafts market to see what other craftsmen were doing. There, among the carved picture frames, glass vases and old paintings, he felt invisible. My work doesn't even compare to this, he thought. But at the same time, he realized that each thing presented there began with the first attempt, with the first doubt. When he returned to the workshop, his hands were burning with the desire to work. Michael decided that he would create a new collection, a few unique tables and shelves that would not just be furniture, but would tell stories. He carved images on wood that reminded him of moments from his childhood, the waves of the sea, a tree near the farm, the stars he saw at night. A few weeks later, Michael went to see Henry again, but this time he brought a whole collection. When Henry saw it, his eyes sparkled. "These aren't just works, Michael. This is a part of you. This will not go unnoticed." Henry agreed to display Michael's work in his shop. A few days later, a young man who was an interior designer came into the store. His eyes fell on one of Michael's shelves and he immediately bought it for his new project. This sale was his first success. Michael returned home with the feeling that his dreams were not so unattainable after all. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel proud of himself. This is just the beginning, he told himself as he looked at his empty shelves, ready to fill them with new pieces. After his first sale, Michael realized that his work could be in demand. But with this realization came another: he couldn't achieve more by staying in his small studio. That night he couldn't sleep for a long time. His thoughts flitted between fear and excitement. Would he be able to rise to the next level? Would it be too much of a risk? At these moments, he remembered his grandfather's words: "Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start now." The next day, Michael took his collection to a local craft fair. It was his first public display. His heart was pounding as he set up his small booth. There were other craftsmen with many years of experience nearby, and Michael felt like a newcomer among professionals. During the first few hours, many people passed by his work, giving him only quick glances. But one day, everything changed. A young woman stopped at his booth and began to look closely at one of the shelves with carved waves on it. "It reminds me of home. Did you create this yourself?" she asked. Michael could barely contain his excitement as he answered. "Yes. I carve each piece by hand." The woman smiled and bought the shelf. Her words inspired Michael more than the purchase itself: "What you do has soul. Keep going." That day at the fair was a turning point. Not only did Michael sell several of his pieces, but he also received an order to create a special collection for a local cafe. For the first time, he saw that his art could not only be sold, but also become a part of other people's lives. That night, when he returned home, Michael sat in his studio and thought, "I've done it. But this is only the beginning. It's time to dream bigger." Michael realized that he had found his way, but it was only the beginning. Working with the cafe brought him his first serious income, but with it came new challenges. The owner of the cafe asked him to create furniture that would not only be beautiful, but also functional, durable, and in keeping with the style of the place. While working on the order, Michael faced difficulties. He did not have the right tools, and the wood he was used to using was not enough. He thought long and hard about whether to invest his savings in new materials and equipment. But in the end, he decided to take the plunge. The first days of work were extremely difficult. The new tools required mastery, and the furniture design required a creative approach that Michael had never used before. His hands ached from long hours of work, and his doubts were eating away at him from the inside. What if the client doesn't like it? What if I'm just wasting time and money, he thought. But he continued. He remembered his grandfather's words: "Your biggest struggle is the struggle with yourself." When the order was ready, Michael was nervously waiting to meet the cafe owner. He brought the tables and shelves he had made and set them up in the cafe. The owner was silent for a long time, inspecting every detail, and then said, "This is exactly what I wanted. You even exceeded my expectations." These words were the best reward. Michael's furniture has become a central part of the cafe's interior, and visitors have repeatedly asked who created it. Thanks to this order, he got several new customers, but it also brought him more work. Michael realized that he needed to develop even more, learn how to manage time, work with new materials, and even think about expanding his workshop. With new clients, Michael got more opportunities, but also more responsibility. His days became longer, his nights shorter, and his free time almost disappeared. Everything was going well until one of the customers returned the furniture, saying, "It's not quite what I expected." This moment was a blow to Michael. He had been working on this order for a long time, putting his heart and soul into every detail. When he heard the criticism, he felt confused and insecure. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was. Maybe it was just a coincidence that someone liked my previous work, he thought. Michael tried to understand what the problem was and asked the customer to explain what was wrong. He received a reply that the style of the furniture did not fit into the design of the room, and it was not his fault, but rather a misunderstanding. Despite this, Michael felt that he had lost some of his confidence. For several days he sat in his workshop, looking at the empty shelves, wondering if he should move on. At that moment, his grandfather came to visit him. Seeing his gloomy face, his grandfather asked, "What's wrong, Michael?" Michael told him about the failed order and his doubts. His grandfather listened attentively and then said, "You think it's a failure. But it's not. It's just a step forward. You've learned how important it is to take into account the wishes of customers. You'll do better next time. And failures are just part of the road to success." These words helped Michael get back on track. He started working on new orders, but now he always discussed in detail with clients what they wanted. Each new job became more personalized, and his reputation began to grow again. After a few months of work, Michael received an unexpected message. A large furniture store in a neighboring town had noticed his work at one of the fairs and offered to cooperate. They wanted Michael to create a collection of furniture for their store. It was a huge opportunity, but also a challenge. Michael had never worked on this scale before. He needed to hire assistants, buy more tools, and rent a spacious room to work in. At first, he was hesitant. What if I don't make it? What if it ruins what I've already built? But then he remembered all the difficulties he had overcome and decided to take the plunge. Michael hired 2 local craftsmen and started working on the collection. The first days were chaotic, lack of materials, broken tools, and constant questions from the team. But Michael remained calm and focused, supporting each of the workers. The result exceeded all expectations. Michael's furniture collection became a hit in the store, and he received new orders. His work began to be appreciated not only for its quality, but also for its style, which reflected the soul of the craftsman. Thanks to his success with the store, Michael became famous in his town. His works began to appear in homes, cafes, and even offices. But he was most impressed when he was approached by one of the most famous designers in the country. The designer said, "Your furniture has a story. I want you to help me create a unique space for a new art center." This offer became the most important in his career. Michael worked on the design for a long time, adding details that reminded him of his own journey, carved waves that symbolized his struggles and stars that represented his dreams. When the art center opened, Michael was invited to the ceremony. Speaking to the guests, the designer said, "This is more than furniture. This is art that tells the story of a man who never gave up." Michael was sitting in his workshop, recalling all the difficulties he had gone through. His journey was filled with struggles, doubts, and risks, but also with joy, inspiration, and achievements. He realized the main thing. There will always be storms in life, but they are the ones that shape us. The most important thing is not to give up and to believe in yourself, even when it seems that there is only darkness around you. Michael continued to create furniture that not only decorated homes but also told stories. His works inspired people to never stop, to look for their calling and to believe that every failure is just a step on the way to success. If this story touched you, remember, you are capable of more. No matter where you are now, every small step can change your life. Never give up. Your dreams are worth fighting for. Share this story with those who need inspiration and subscribe to Rise and Inspire for more life-changing stories. Let's inspire each other together.